Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. I have a tag for you today. It's been a while since I've done a tag. I guess it's because I've been doing just one video a week, so that leaves less time for tags. But I've been tagged by the original creator, who is Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads. And the tag is the Bookish A to Z, I think he said A to Z, I'm going to say Z, hot or not tag. So this tag requires no preparation, so that also helps. It's just a discussion tag. So for each letter of the alphabet, Greg came up with a prompt, and we have to say whether it's hot or not, or something in between, and perhaps with a few explanations why. So A is for audiobooks, hot or not. 2 years ago, I would have said not. Last year, I would have said, rather not. This year, I have to say it's warming up a little bit. It's still not hot for me. It's still not my favorite way of discovering a book, of reading a book. I prefer reading with my eyes, but I do find that audiobooks have their use. I've read more this year. I think I've read more than half a dozen. It's probably around 10. Well, listened to, read, depending on what you want to, what sort of verb you want to use. But it's still a work in progress for me. So I'm going to say not entirely cold, not entirely warm. It's warming up. I think I'm going to do a video specifically on that towards the end of the year, somewhere in December, just to talk about my journey, I guess. I can call it the journey with the audiobooks. What I like and what I don't like about them. And the don't like is kind of... there's more things in there than in the likes. But anyway, so at the moment, it's not entirely cold, but lukewarm. B is for Bildungsroman. So that is dealing with a person's formative years or spiritual education. And for me, that is not. I am not attracted to these books. Once in a while, I will read one and it turns out that I like it. But generally, if it says Bildungsroman, or if the summary of the book says that we meet this character when they are in their teenage years and that they are learning about life, I put the book back, because just back on the table, on the shelf, whatever, because it's just not my type of book. So I'm just going to say not. C is for children's books. I haven't read one in a while. I know I read some in April. There's a readathon for children's book in April. So, some are good, some are good. Once upon a time, it's now been 12 years. A friend of mine was living close to where I was living, and she had a baby, and every week I would go to see her and I would read books to that little baby who became a little toddler. And nowadays, this is a teenager who loves books. And when I read all of these children's books, some of them were really good. Some of them were so much fun, but some others were really, really boring. But anyway, since at the moment there are no children around me to whom I could read, I'm going to say not. I'm not reading children's books at the moment. D is for digital. Hot, very hot. I don't read as much on my little iPad as I do on paper books, for the simple reason that for my job, I spend the entire day in front of a screen and I get tired of it. I do prefer paper books to electronic books, but the fact that through my little iPad, I can have access to thousands of books without leaving my home, that is just wonderful. So I'm going to say hot. E is for experimental. Not hot at all. The thing with experimental novels, because I think it's mainly novels, experimental nonfiction, that's even worse. I feel like they are half-finished products. The author is trying something and then publishing it to the world and asking them to see what a great innovator they are. It's fine to innovate, do that in your classroom, do that in your office, but don't put out to me something that is just a half-finished product. That is just an experiment. I want to read a finished product. I don't want to read an experiment. So I'm going to say not. Even though I've enjoyed some books that were considered experimental novels. For example, Georges Perec. But I carve an exception for him, because I don't think he was going out, he was trying to be experimental. I don't think that's what he was trying to do. He was playful in his writing. He liked the constraint. He liked, for example, he wrote an entire book without using the vowel E. So yes, of course, we could consider it an experiment. but for him it was a game, and I see the playfulness of it. So for me, that was not, it is experimental, I guess. It is not quite, I don't know, there's some experimental aspect to it, but to me it's more like a game. It's more a playful novel than an experimental novel. So there's sort of this exception, but basically somebody who goes out to try to be experimental, no, thanks. F is for fantasy. Not. The thing is, if I had read fantasy novels as a teenager, I'm sure I would still love them today. But I did not read them as a teenager, and somehow my brain hasn't gotten used to them, so they don't attract me at all. I've read just a handful of fantasy novels. When the Lord of the Rings trilogy came out by Peter Jackson, the movies, obviously not the books, I wasn't born, but the movies, when they came out, I asked my brother, can I borrow your books? I would like to read them before I watch the movies. And he said, start with The Hobbit. So I started with The Hobbit, and I didn't get it. I just did not get it. Whatever the words were describing, I could not picture it in my mind. I could not see what a hobbit was, what a dwarf was, like one in comparison with the other. I could not picture the dragon. I could not picture the caves. I could not picture anything in my mind. And I found it quite boring. So I never bothered with The Lord of the Rings, and that sort of spelled the end of my experiment with fantasy, at least epic fantasy. It's not my type of thing. G is for graphic novel. I can understand the appeal, but for me it's not. When I was younger, I read a lot of comics. So they're not graphic novels in my opinion. They're comics like Asterix and others in the French-Belgian tradition of comics, which is quite different from the American tradition. But I did read a lot of those, but they are comics, they're not graphic novels, even though they tell a story with graphics. But in my mind, graphic novels are something else. I did read a few, I tried a few, they're nice, but for me, it's nothing more than that. So it's going to be a not. H is for horror. Not. I don't like horror, I don't read horror, and I'm not interested in horror. I can just read the news. It's horrible enough. I is for inspirational. Not. Again, it's not something that I like books that are trying to instill faith in you or stir your spiritual side. No, I don't care. J is for journalism. Hot, very, very hot. Particularly when I see investigative journalism that becomes a book. So we see a lot of investigative journalism on television. TV shows like, I don't know, 60 Minutes, or in Canada, it's The Fifth Estate, or things like that. But when it becomes a book, like somebody decides to go through archives or interview people or try to dig up stuff and presents a book about it. For example, Patrick Radden Keefe, he did that for Say Nothing, which was about events in Northern Ireland in the 1970s, or about the Sackler family in Empire of Pain, or for Paradise Falls, which ended up in second place for the BookTube prize, and that was a book by Keith O'Brien, which was about a chemical disaster, I guess, or rather a hidden chemical disaster. An entire neighborhood was built on what was a chemical dump, and it created sickness and disease for a lot of people, and the officials did not want to admit to that. They did not want to recognize that there was a problem, and Keith O'Brien just went back to look at it and interview people and look at the archives, and it is just a wonderful book. So yes, absolutely, journalism is just wonderful. K is for kitsch, so something that has popular or sentimental appeal. It depends. If it's well done, I'm all for it. I love it. Well, I love it. Once in a while, it's comfortable. I like a good warm cozy blanket, and kitsch often is that. But then again, kitsch is often poorly made, and then I don't like it. I'm going to give you an example. A book that is extremely super popular on BookTube, and I assume on other social media about books, is Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I read it because I wanted something warm and cozy and just cheer me up and pick me up. But the thing is, the first short story, it's a collection of 4 short stories, somewhat related. And the first one is just so poorly made, it drove me bonkers. And the thing that makes it poorly made is that we have a brilliant woman, super intelligent, speaks multiple languages, very invested in her work, and at some point she realizes that she has feelings for a man. And then she turns into a toddler. That drove me bonkers. I hate it when it happens. And apparently nobody notices it. It doesn't matter. Oh yes, she's crying and throwing temper tantrums in public. And she's supposed to be a super intelligent woman. It drives me nuts. So when it's poorly made, it's not hot. But when it's well made, it's kind of hot. Next is library. Super hot. Yes, I love the library. About half of what I read comes from the library. So that creates a problem for my TBR, for my books that are unread, because I buy the same number of books that I read, but because I read half my books from the library, it means that I don't read half of my books. It's an issue. It's a different issue. But for library, hot. Super hot. M is for mystery. Again, 3 years ago, I would have said very hot. But now I have to say it's going a bit on the cold side. It's going to be a bit on the lukewarm side. It used to be my go-to genres when I needed a pick-me-up. When I didn't know what to read, I wanted something that I knew what to expect, I would pick up a mystery. But now that has been replaced by romance. So when I need a quick pick-me-up, I go for a romance. I don't go for a mystery. So I have a number of mysteries on my shelves and I haven't read them. So I still read some mysteries. I think they're great books. I think they're wonderful. But for me, they are going on the colder side. They're getting colder. Perhaps I should stir the pot a little bit. Just turn on the heat underneath, and I'm sure that my love could be rekindled. N is for nonfiction. Hot. Very, very hot. Wonderfully hot. Boiling hot. Probably my favorite of the all the alphabetical things there. My favorite. So total wonderful nonfiction. Yes, read some. Yeah. So it's nonfiction November also. So this is the time to read some nonfiction. O is for Omnibus. Hot or not? It has advantages and it has disadvantages. So I'm going to say in the middle. The advantages, they are so much cheaper than buying each book individually. Example, I think it's just right here. This is in French. It's an omnibus of 3 of Dostoevsky's works, The Idiot, The Gambler, and Crime and Punishment. Translated very precisely by this man, so Markowitz. So that same publishing house also publishes these novels by Dostoevsky, by that same translator, in mass market paperback size. The thing is, each mass market paperback is about $20, and for these 3 books, it wouldn't be 3 mass market paperbacks, it would be 5. Because for The Idiot and Crime and Punishment, they have decided to separate it in 2 because it would have been too thick. So they decided to make volume 1 and volume 2 for both The Idiot and Crime and Punishment. So that means that for these 3 books, it would have been about $100 in mass market paperback. But this book is just $54. So it's wonderful. However, the inconvenience is that I already have one of these books in mass market paperback, which is The Gambler. So it's sort of redundant. Omnibus can be redundant. I have the same issue with an omnibus that I bought of P.G. Wodehouse. So there are 3 Jeeves and Wooster novels in there. There are 2 that I don't have and that I haven't read. So, and also it was a used book that I bought for $3. So it was a bargain. But still, I have 1 book too many. But that's easily remedied. I can just give away the book that I have in double. So I'm going to say hot for the omnibus. Yeah, also it's not very practical. So if I want to go read in a cafe, it doesn't fit in my purse. It doesn't fit at all. Yeah, and it doesn't really fit on, I don't know, public transportation. If you have to go to work by bus or metro and you're trying to lug this around, it's not very practical. But so it has advantages and disadvantages. So I'm going to say lukewarm, but hot lukewarm. Yeah, on the warmer side. And now I've lost my list of prompts. Okay, where was I? P is for poetry. Hot or not? I'm going to say not. A couple of years ago, I wanted to investigate poetry. I want to learn more about it. I wanted to read more of it. And it turns out that I haven't done that. So I guess it means that I'm not really into poetry. I like epic poetry though. The older ones. the Iliad, the Odyssey, obviously, which are Gilgamesh, which are pretty much the oldest books that we have. Yeah, beyond that, I'm not that much into poetry. Q is for quests, when the protagonist goes on a quest, physical or spiritual. I would say not. I don't really care for quests. We see a lot of those in fantasy, I guess. Yeah, the epic fantasy, it's always about a quest. They must find the sword, they must find the holy grail, they must find I don't know what. Yeah, they must destroy the ring. Yeah, the type of books that I read, it's not so much about quests, so I'm going to say not for me. R is for romance. Hot. Very hot. Yeah, I enjoy romance a lot more than I thought. A lot more? I don't know. I made a video about that, my journey with romance novels. When I was a teenager, I read some of them, and then for 20 years, I read none. Just not a single one. Well, unless you count Jane Austen. But basically, I read nothing. And then, because of the pandemic, I wanted some love, and I picked up some romance because of the enthusiasm of booktubers. It's one of the main reasons. And I eventually found that I love historical romance, Regency romance. They're wonderful. I love them. S is for science fiction. Not. It's a bit like fantasy. I did not read it as a teenager. My brain is not made for that. I'd like to try it. I have a book by Ursula K. Le Guin, The Left Hand of Darkness, which is supposed to be according to Steve Donahue, once upon a time, I don't know, I think it's last year or 2 years ago, Anna from Anna's Books went to visit Steve Donahue, and Anna asked him, if I wanted to get into science fiction, where should I start? And Steve's answer was Ursula K. Le Guin. So I thought, well, if the recommendation is good for Anna, it's going to be good for me, because I tend to like the same books as Anna. No, not all the time. We don't read necessarily the same things, but I think if it's good for her, it would be good for me. So I decided to buy the book, and I still do not feel inspired to read it. I don't know. It really, science fiction just doesn't appeal to me at the moment, so I'm going to say not. T is for translation. Hot, extremely hot. I'm a translator. So of course, I'm preaching for the choir, I guess. No, it's not. That's not the term. I have a conflict of interest. Yes, I guess that would be a better, more accurate, I guess, description of my situation. But yes, I'm totally for books in translation. I love to discover the world through books, and translation is one of the great ways to discover the world. So yes, absolutely, totally hot. U is for Übermensch, the Superman or the extraordinary human, characters who can do everything. Not. Well, obviously there's Superman, I suppose, in the pantheon of superheroes. Superman's my favorite, but then I don't read comic books, so I don't know. And if there's some sort of Superman character in a realistic book, not with superpowers, but the person who can do no wrong, who is superior to everyone else, it's not believable. So I'm going to say no, not hot. V is for Victorian literature from 1837 to 1901. Now, let's note here that there is no geographical limitation. There's only a time limitation. So, is literature from the 19th century in general wonderful? Oh yes, particularly French literature, Russian literature, and also English language literature. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So yes, totally hot. W is for Western. Not hot for me. I did read one for June on the Rage. I read an Elmore Leonard book. It was okay. It was nice. It was kind of an adventure book, but it's not necessarily something I will go back to very often. It's not going to become my pick-me-up genre. So I'm going to say not. X is for X-rated. I don't read entirely X-rated books, like a book that is X-rated from A to Z, but in romance there are several scenes that are X-rated, if not more. Do I like those? No. More often than not, they are not good. They don't help the story. I could skip them. The authors could skip them. I really wouldn't cry for that. So I'm going to say not. Y is for young adult. I'm going to say not hot. It's not something that I read. It's not something that I'm interested in. When I was a teenager, yes, of course, I read some of them. But as an adult, I've passed the age, I guess. I'm an adult now, so not a young adult. So no. Z is for zeitgeist, spirit or mood of the times. Now, depends what we mean by that. If it is, let's say, a contemporary novel, and the author says, I want to capture the zeitgeist of our times, and deliberately tries to write a novel that will capture the zeitgeist of our time, chances are it's going to fail. I think it's something that we realize later, like 50 years later, we look at a novel and we sort of say, yes, this one was really representative of its time. But also a historical novel that tries to capture the zeitgeist of a past time, I don't think it works either. It becomes a historical novel, but I don't think it necessarily depicts the zeitgeist of the time well. So I think it's something that happens later, something we realize later. So for these books that sort of are representative of their time, yes, they're wonderful, but it has to be a conclusion that happens later, that comes later. It cannot be something intentional. At the end, we have to tag some people. Greg already tagged a lot of people, so I'm going to tag. I'm looking at all the people he tagged, and I'm trying to find some people he hasn't tagged. So I'm going to tag Melinda from A Web of Stories, Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, and Aaron Facer. So just an invitation as usual. If you don't feel like doing the tag, it's okay, but I think it's an interesting tag, and it's kind of easy. So thank you, Greg, for tagging me, and let me know in the comments from that list of 26 prompts for you, which is the hottest and which is the coldest, so the notest. That's not a word, it should be. So that's it. Thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine.